Paul Seegert is a managing partner at PCS Advisors, a healthcare benefits consulting firm based in Northern California, and he was following and monitoring the arguments today closely. I'm interested in hearing his perspective on this very issue as to where the Supreme Court justices seem to be headed today, and what are the arguments in favor and against. Paul Seegert, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Laura?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining the show today. This is an area I think you and I talked about before, about even the prospect of vaccine mandates when it came to businesses. And there has been, frankly, it's ran the gamut in terms of the reactions from different business leaders and sectors of employment. Lay the foundation for us generally. What has been the reaction, sort of generally speaking, for those who have been in favor of these mandates or against?
Well, I think those that are in favor welcomed the cover that was provided by the mandate, so that they weren't kind of the bad guy culturally with their employees, and many of them had been hoping for something like this to happen, and then a large part of the marketplace was then put it on pause because they didn't want to. So it kind of had an unintended effect as well, because they didn't want to put in their own policy only to find it didn't meet the muster or match up with what OSHA came out with once they interpreted the rule. So we had kind of an interesting path there where prior to the OSHA announcement, we had 85% of employers that told us they would have a policy, some sort of a mandate around vaccination in place at their company by the end of the year. And then after the announcement, that slowed down, where now we have about 18% of employers that have a policy in place, and another 7 or so that say they will put a policy in place no matter what happens in the courts. And then we've got 32% that say they will only do it if this OSHA ruling survives court challenge.
And just so we're clear for everyone thinking about OSHA, and I know we're in Alphabet City here in Washington, D.C., kind of the crux of the argument is that whether OSHA had the authority to dictate this. What have been the concerns? I mean, does OSHA, that's really the issue that matters to the Supreme Court, but why does OSHA believe it has the authority to do this?
Well, they believe that their position is that, and they're using their emergency temporary standard authority, which they don't use that often, and it's done when there's grave danger and it's necessary to protect lives or save lives. So their position is that if they do not do this, then lives will be lost, and so that's the reason they need to do it. And some of the lower court rulings that weren't in favor of this or kind of put the stays in place questioned that and said, hey, if it's grave danger that you're responding to, why did it take this long to get around to doing that? And maybe the time that grave danger perhaps has passed or isn't there. And so that's really what they have to prove, that they are responding to grave danger and that they have the authority to do it. It's kind of interesting to look back historically at these emergency temporary standard authorities and see kind of what the track record has been. 6 out of the last 9 times that OSHA has issued one of these, they haven't survived court challenge, either partially or completely.
And it's interesting because well, yeah, of course. Of course, it's interesting to think about it in this respect as well. Obviously, and I certainly believe in the good in all people. Let me give you my, wonderful moment of optimism. But there's also, right, a business reason for OSHA to try to do this, right? Because we know that they're talking about, obviously, workplaces, which means that they're thinking about laborers, they're thinking about those who are employed, thinking about the economy, thinking about what it would mean to the greater economy in general that's already facing, joblessness, jobs unfulfilled, and issues like that. Part of this is to try to keep the workforce going, even more than it's just about generally saving lives, right?
Yeah, they want to protect the workforce. That is their mandate. That's why they were created. And I think not only is it a vaccine mandate, there's more to it, of course, and it is about safety in general. The masking, if this survives and they don't put a temporary hold on it out of the proceedings today, then masking will be required in workplaces for unvaccinated people, which, while you can, unfortunately, in our polarized world today, you can find people that would support that. Whatever your position is, you can find people that will reinforce that for you. But the general thinking is that that would increase the safety of the workplace to the average American.
And so, what you listened to the arguments today, and did you get a sense of where the court was leaning?
Well, I think we can safely say it's a pretty conservative court, and it looks to be, if I had to predict, I would say that of the two, the OSHA mandate looks to me like chances are better than 50% that it wouldn't stand, whereas the healthcare mandate likely will, because there's so much precedent for requiring healthcare workers to have other vaccines against other illnesses and stuff like that. So I think that one's more likely to survive.
And you are a consultant and healthcare benefits and the like, and I'm just wondering, what do you think the reaction of that will be in the greater business community if that were to be the case?
Yeah, if that's the case, I think many will, as a result of all this confusion that the business community has had to deal with. It kind of gets back to some of those numbers I was talking about earlier. I think we're going to find that we will end up with a minority of businesses that have a mandate in place, and which is ironic from where we started not too many months back with 85% saying that they would have something by the end of the year. But they've kind of seen a lot of backlash culturally, quite a few employers, and now when we talk to employers, 1 in 3 say they are very concerned about staffing issues. I think we also have seen the Great Resignation develop during the same period of time, so that's complicated the matter for lots of these employers who are fighting hard to keep the talent that they have and having a very difficult time, toughest in 15 years, to fill the empty chairs in their office.
And, you mentioned at the beginning the idea of how at one point the OSHA, mandates were sort of welcome cover. It might be curious to people to think about whether the culture of employees is really driving these decisions, or if it really is top down. Are you getting a sense that in businesses people are more likely to that the owners would need that sort of cover because of just the dynamic of those requirements? Yeah. Yeah,
I think some do based on size and industry and how durable they can be. I mean, how many available workers are there in their industry, that kind of thing. So the smaller employers that were in favor, I think, welcomed it and needed that cover or benefited from it. And the larger employers, if you're United Airlines and you fire 500 people and you have 67,000 in your workforce, that's a little more, they can survive that a little bit better, a little more easily from a staffing perspective. And then you have at the other end of the spectrum, so small employers that we've talked to where they have skilled craftsmen and labor that they provide as their service, and if they literally cannot afford to lose 1 or 2 or 3 of those key employees, and they're very difficult to replace. So they have just a practical and legitimate fear of how it could work out if they were to implement a policy. And that's even true for small healthcare employers. I've talked to CEOs of smaller hospitals in more rural settings. They were facing a staffing shortage before the pandemic, a pretty severe staffing shortage before the pandemic. And then if you look at what happened, as an example, the traveling nurses' wages, they went from $1,900 a week to as much as $5,000 a week with $20,000 signing bonuses. That drew staff